A little while ago, this graph got posted to Twitter. It got posted by an oomphy, as a matter of fact, and it blew up. Political identities of 12th grade boys. Percent identifying as liberal or conservative. And as you can see, as we approach the modern day, an increasing proportion of 12th grade boys identify as conservatives rather than liberals. I want to talk to you about why this graph is a lie. To be clear, it is true that men or boys or whatever, on average, are more conservative than women or girls, but this graph is misrepresentative in a way that led to a lot of bad discourse. Okay, let's take a look. So first of all, I want you all to take a look at the y-axis. Again, this is simple, but a lot of people miss it. This does not start at 0. It starts at 10, meaning that the swing we're seeing in liberal boys from 1975 to 2023 is not 25 to like 5 or whatever. It's 25 to 13, which is a pretty significant difference. Likewise, with the conservative graph, we've gone from what seems to be a 17 over to a 23. Not a huge jump. That's one. For two, did you know that conservative and liberal were not the only things that respondents could put on their sheet? They could put centrist or unaffiliated, but there was another category, extremist or radical, I believe was the term. Want to know something interesting? That radical designation was not split between left and right. The idiots who made that survey just grouped all radicals together. Everyone who would consider themselves a radical, regardless of their political affiliation, kablamo, you're neither liberal nor conservative, you're now in the radical category. Now, right off the bat, purely in a sociological data analysis sense, can we understand why this sort of offers an issue? I'll tell you this much, guys. I've met a lot of left-leaning people, especially young left-leaning people, who will call themselves radical at the drop of a hat. And I've met a lot of Nazis who will call themselves conservatives. In fact, it's been the mission of conservatism for decades now, or far-right conservatives, to disguise their power level, to hide how influential they are, or how radically far-right they are. Nazis don't run around calling themselves Nazis, or at least not many of them do. The Klan isn't politically relevant these days. Instead, they call themselves traditional conservatives and get hired by DeSantis' campaign team. Whereas socialists will happily call themselves radicals. See, I think we're looking at another bias here. And Fortnite, you've got it. You spoiled, and I hate you for it. Notice how the number of liberal identifying boys has dropped a decent amount, but the number of conservative identifying boys has not increased by such a significant amount. I think what we're looking at isn't liberals going to conservatives. It's liberals identifying as radicals. American schools all over the country are full of socialist kids. No, like, that's not a joke. Seriously. Talk to a younger relative or something, or maybe some people watching are in high school right now. It's not hard to find socialists. You might struggle a bit to find somebody who self-identifies as a Nazi because they would get the shit beaten out of them after class. Not that hard to find socialists. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, that's an excellent point, Dream Canoe. You know how in the Barbie movie, that like middle school girl called Barbie a fascist, how she was kind of like a stand-in for misguided radical criticism of Barbie, like the toy? There are a lot of young people like that. So I think that we're hiding an important category here. Have the number of conservative identifying boys gone up over time? Sure, I'll accept that. But I feel like the data is hiding a much more significant shift towards populism. Most young people are populist-leaning, or at least more populist-leaning on average than older people, because radical politics are more appealing to young people, because you can offer simple narratives about democracy or reclaiming something, and, you know, they respond to the narrative. Young people like to feel like isekai protagonists or whatever. And I just feel like, because American liberalism has done a lot to expel populist radicals, and American conservatism has not. American conservatism has always had its arms well open to Nazism. It does. As a product of that, I just do not think this data is representative. I think this is a psyop. I think this is fake and gay. That is what I think. I think it's fake and gay. So for anyone who was doomering over this, seriously, don't. Fake and gay. Yeah, fake and gay. Thank you. Here's the full graph. Ah, perfect. Wait, hold on. This is also kind of dumb, but for a different reason. what they want you to see, what the data actually shows. And then it says people who identify as neither conservative nor liberal are up here. This is not actually a part of the graph. This is not the original graph. Somebody edited this. There is not a single third category called neither. But it is indicative of how many people are being left out of this representation. Can we really claim to know anything about the demography of the political beliefs of 12-year-olds, or sorry, not 12-year-old, 12th graders in America, when over 60% of the people being polled aren't into the two shown categories? Like, no, that's silly. What does the y-axis represent? The percentage of respondents who identified with that group. Can something be true and gay? No. All things that are fake are gay, and all things that are gay are fake. Thank you. I just think there are more radicals, flatly. And really, just based on what we know about Gen Z, in spite of what people have tried to tell you, have you heard that narrative that conservatives try to put forward where Gen Z is like the most conservative generation or something? Like, I remember this narrative being popular for a while, where there was like one study that they deliberately, willfully misinterpreted, and as a product of that, they were like, well, actually, Gen Z has rejected the woke narrative. This only lasted a couple months because the data suggesting Gen Z is very far left compared to previous generations is overwhelming and undeniable. But I remember there was this effort to do this. This is the conservative attempt to construct a silent majority. This is a very common tactic. They have done this for literally all time, that conservatism as an ideology has existed. The idea that, you know, we have to exaggerate this missing component, this unspoken, unheard group that are indicative of the fact that actually people are fed up with this liberal bullcrap. In reality, this just isn't happening. And I think that conservatives are starting to accept this, which is one of the reasons why they've gotten louder about stuff like raising the voting age. In fact, that was proposed by, what's his name? I'm afraid Vivek? What's the name of that guy? Ramaswamy? Yeah, here we go. He said that he wanted to raise the voting age to 20. Insane. 25? But as insane as that sounds, that's actually probably going to be a more common position held by the right wing, because conservatism literally cannot survive Gen Z and Gen Alpha. The millennials are bad enough, being on average significantly more left-leaning than Gen Xers, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha, by all projections, are going to single-handedly shift this country's political inclination so far leftward that the Republican Party will literally not be relevant on a national scale. They would only be relevant for state elections and only in the bad states. Let's be fair here. Florida, blue. Texas, blue. They can keep what? Missouri and Kansas? It doesn't work, you know? So the Republican Party has three options. They can try to convert the youth, groom them into conservatism, which they've been trying to do for a long time, and it's not completely unsuccessful. Like, they have had wins there, especially with the incel, manosphere, Andrew Tate, red pill stuff, but it's not nearly enough to overwhelm the general tendencies of the group. They can raise the voting age and thereby kind of delay the problem, but only delay it, not overcome it entirely. Or they can shift leftward themselves, which obviously they really don't want to do. Was Bernie Sanders popular with college students? Was Bernie Sanders popular with college students? Bernie Sanders primary young voters percentage. Boy, do I have a set of responses for you as soon as this link opens. That would be great. Here, in Michigan, voters age 18 to 44 in the 2020 primary. Sanders. This isn't just college students. This is 18 to 44. In other words, Gen Z and millennials. That's the age range represented here. If you ask millennials and younger, and that's at this point about mid-40s and younger, it's you get socialists, baby. Seriously. At the very least, you get enthusiastic social democrats, like overwhelmingly so. It's a significant bias. And with time, not only will there be more voting Gen Z, Gen Alpha, you know, whatever, but the older people get, the higher the likelihood is that they actually go out and vote, which means that eventually one day, even us millennials, in my case, Gen Z, in the case of a lot of you people, we will be old. And statistically speaking, we will be more likely to vote. I already vote, of course, and I hope you guys do too, but I'm talking broad demographics here. You're old already, Vosh? What do you mean? Yeah, Zan. That's why Florida and DeSantis are working so hard to control the schooling. You know, they who control the past control the future, right? Oh, here. 2020 New Hampshire primary, Sanders and Buttigieg only candidates with significant support from youth. Yeah, sorry about the Buttigieg thing. That's your insufferable liberal college classmates. But 51% of age 18 to 29, Sanders. If college students were the only people who could vote, Bernie Sanders would have won in a landslide in 2016 and 2020. Bernie Sanders would have won with numbers that made Reagan's victories look paltry in comparison. And that generation is getting older and more likely to vote. So do you understand now why Vivek is so desperate? Why he would say something like this, even though it like kills the chance of him getting young voters himself? If we were really due to worry about this, I don't think they would be this scared of young voters. You know? I want to talk about something else related to this as well, which is the ideology gap in between men and women. Most people, I'm sorry to say, are straight, and even for a lot of people who aren't straight, they will still settle into heterosexual relationships. Not just because they're in the closet, but like a lot of bi women settle down with guys. Like that happens. That's normal. That's fine. And it is true that for pretty much all of the past century, men have been more conservative on average than women. After all, a lot of men didn't even want women to have the vote, right? So it's not like they've seen eye to eye on everything. Whereas every woman who votes is presumably in favor at least of that, or at least I would hope so. Sorry about the stammering. I'm very hungry. So what am I getting at with this, right? There's a phenomena. I'm calling women out here. I've never done this before, but I'm going to say something negative about women. Where liberal women will settle for and be accepting of conservative men. I don't have any respect for you. If you are an egalitarian-minded individual... No, that's okay, Vermin. I don't want to eat while I'm stream. If you're an egalitarian-minded individual, if you're a person who values equal rights, if you're a person who has strong principled positions on racial or gender issues, and then you end up settling for and passively, I guess, abetting the political positions of a conservative, I think you're spineless. And I think that you could do better. And I think that there's a lot of dick out there that you could probably find that isn't attached to that. I think also that because people tend to associate... Well, hold on, Quoteth, I'm not done. People also tend to associate conservatism with masculinity. Now, I think this is ridiculous, okay? Because in my experience, when I deal with conservatives online, they are failed men who blame society for their failures. They're unlovable physiognomically. They are weak on both an aesthetic and physical level. Some of these things they can improve. Sometimes they're just cursed by God. God does hate them, and I hate them too. I think very little of them. You know, I many such cases, and you've all seen it too, haven't you? But there is still an association, and I will admit that a lot of women are into a very specific kind of guy that tends to overlap with conservative values, namely a kind of rustic, outdoorsy, wears a baseball cap and wraparound shades while driving their Outback into the forest kind of guy, that aesthetic of guy. There's an association between them and conservatives, not necessarily an intrinsic one, but life is complicated. Now, I have good news for you people. It is true that in doing so, women have been aiding and abetting conservatism for a while. I do genuinely believe, and this might be controversial to a lot of people, but I do genuinely believe that the repulsion that good, principled, left-leaning women feel towards conservative men gets those men to change. Like, seriously. I think that a lot of men are conservative when they're young at the height of their unfuckability. Not just because they're awkward like young people or whatever, but also because their conservatism is tied into feelings of insecurity, a lack of self-worth. It plays on those feelings, and it makes them just generally unpleasant to be around. I can say, for instance, that I was most unpleasant during the brief period of time in high school I felt I was a libertarian, and it's all been uphill from there, you know? Nearly 30 and still growing up every year, happy to say. And it can happen to all of us, so don't lose hope. Of course, I'm still unpleasant, but I've grown up in other ways. Where am I going with this? Well, this pattern, this process that I'm talking about, I don't think it's happening as much anymore. Oh, yeah, here we go. Here's a comic that I think really, really cuts to the heart of it. Quoteth, repost that link, will you? Every third hetero couple. Did you check out that Salon article I sent everyone? Next to the most racist man alive, who looks like this too. That's true. Now I do blame women for this. Look at her. Look at how cute she is. She could do better. But what am I gonna? Well, you know what I blame them for? It's sexual submissives. They can't help it. Women, the lot of them. Oh, I'm so progressive. I'm a liberal woman. I believe in equality. But I also want a guy who will smack me around in bed. You can find left-leaning guys who will smack you around in bed. I know at least one. It's the bottoms. I'm telling you, it's the bottoms. They ruin everything. They've ruined everything for all time. Okay. Hey, listen, okay? How did the Trojans do the thing with the horse? Because wait, I had a joke in here. Hold on. Because the bottoms let the horse in. The bottoms open the city gates and let the horse inside of them. Because the bottom would open their hole to the horse, and that's how the city fell. Right. Got it. Nailed it. That wasn't a bit. I actually had it in my head for 1 second. Okay. What am I getting at here? It's not happening anymore. This is just one article from 2018, but I have noticed a significant shift in terms of the media that I see from young people, where now that people are shifting more towards radical left politics, radical left-leaning people, radical left-leaning women don't want to f conservatives, okay? Think about it. Liberalism emphasizes civility politics, reaching across the aisle, the value of discourse, even through disagreement, shit like that, right? So it makes sense that a liberal would be more willing to enable, abet, or accept conservative relations in their personal life. I'm not being euphemistic here. I actually mean this. Or to put it another way, right? How many liberals have you met in your life who are one of those, well, I disagree with them, but I'd have a beer with them types, right? Now, how many socialists have you met who are like that? Increasing political partisanship is a fact of life. We know for a fact that it's been skyrocketing over time, that more and more people on the left aren't doing this. Well, I have disagreements with them, but blah, blah, blah. And instead are just going, no, f them. Why the Like, it is a lot easier, I think, to imagine a liberal woman who likes Huffington Post getting along with like a kind of staunch economic conservative neocon guy than a modern day young college student leftist getting along with like an alt-right kid or like a Trumper. That is a way larger gap. That is a much, much, much larger gap. And because the gap is larger, there is a greater unwillingness to cross that aisle in terms of interpersonal relationships. And what I'm getting at here is that if young men want pussy, they're going to have to stop being so unfuckable. The standards are raising, folks. And listen, normally I'm one to decry the raising of standards. I think there are a lot of ways in which raising standards are hurting, especially men. I think that standards have been high for women in terms of presentation, appearance for a long time. But I feel like with the rise of social media and dating apps, guys have been dealing with a precipitous rise in the shallow bullshit they have to deal with. And I feel bad for them, and I think it's fucked up. Hey, I'm not defending that. But if there is an environment where I'm okay with standards rising and unfuckability being punished, it is in being a fascist. I'm okay with that, actually, all right? Listen, there aren't that many young high school boys who are like neocons who worship Kissinger or what. No. Young people who get into politics these days, at least a significant portion of them, are radicals, which means they're either going down the socialist or fascist pipelines. Not all of them, but a lot of them, at least the politically minded individuals. And I think that, frankly, I just don't think you should ever get pussy if you're a fascist. That's just a strong political... I don't. Or ass. No anal loophole. I just don't think you should. Now, this seems like I'm being vindictive, but in reality, what I'm talking about here, it's a kind of social ostracization that is good. It's morally right. I think it's good to socially ostracize fascists. I'm sorry. I just do. If they stop being fascists, then they can stop being socially ostracized. I'm sticking by this belief. Let's be real here. Considering these two facts, one, women on average are more left-leaning than men, and two, a lot of men are willing to do some pretty heinous shit to their personality in order to get pussy, I think that we're seeing an increase in an effective strategy of social isolation and ostracization that work against fascists, which is them being treated as unfuckable losers. Again, they could overcome this by not being fascists. I am aware of the fact that a lot of young men who are fascist leaning will only fall further down the rabbit hole if they continue to experience this loneliness and ennui and ostracization. But let's be real here, okay? Fuck you! We're not talking about you being lonely because you're awkward or because you have a couple of bad beliefs or because you can't dress great or because you're poor or because you live in a city. Those are all valid things to... You're a fascist! God, you don't have to be. I'm sorry. It's like, we're being socially ostracized because we keep shitting ourselves. Sure, okay, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. You know, it's like, I think that's fine. If the social ostracization issue exclusively affected fascist men, then I would be fine with it. And women, let's be fair, even though that's less of an issue. Obviously, that's not the case. There are plenty of young men who are lonely and aren't fascists. In fact, I want to be clear here. I do not want people to make the logical leap where they see a guy who's lonely or kind of like misery posting or an incel or whatever and think, oh, it's because they're a fascist. That's not true. That's some bullshit people say online to sort of like soothe themselves with like the myth of meritocracy. It's the same shit liberals and conservatives do, you know? Oh, no. There's no unfairness in the dating marketplace. Oh, no, the reason why they're so lonely and are going to die alone and are suicidally ideative and stuff, it must be because they're the problem. Like, that's some bullshit. Let's not pretend things are fair out there. But in the instances where the harm is being caused by people not caring about you because you're fascist, fuck off and good. I think that this is one of the reasons why this graph is not as bad as a lot of people initially thought that it was, you know? First of all, this is 12th grade boys, and I remember being a 12th grade boy, and I was deeply unfuckable at the time, and I'm sure that's a common experience to many people in that age range, even to people of their own age. You are literally a high schooler. You are an awkward piece of shit. You're literally a fucking child, so obviously. Though that doesn't stop. Okay, I remember doing this. You remember being in like 9th grade and thinking like, I've never even come in somebody bareback. It's over for me. Incels post that shit online, but even before the incel movement was a thing, I remember being mopey when I was a kid and being like, man, like not super seriously or whatever, but just like, you know. Yeah, it's like, because being self-pitying is literally like a thing at that age range. Why? Because you're 14, because you're an idiot. What do you mean? What do you mean, why? Logic? Have you considered 14-year-old Vosh, that it's irrational to be... Like, no, yeah, no shit. Kids are idiots. Adults are too, but kids are idiots. Double idiots, even. That's one of the reasons I'm not so worried about this graph as well. I think that there is a strong social incentive for men who want to socially integrate to not be fascist. Not just to be fuckable, but also because fascists are intolerable monsters who shed the flesh of man and wrap themselves in the skin of a lizard person or perhaps a demon. They're not real people the way you and I are. They are politically sandblasted of emotions in the way that we are. All fixable, of course. None of this is permanent or inherent, but, you know, we are what we do, and they do and think bad things. They should stop. Thoughts on Catholic-type fascists? The funny thing about Catholic convert fascists is that almost all of them are unfuckable young men who decide to politicize and make martyrdom of their virginity. Like, almost every time, it's an unfuckable guy who has a porn addiction, who feels incredible self-hate, and then they decide, well, actually, you know, what if I repented and my virginity became a good thing because it made me a warrior to Christ, and I stopped and I gave up porn, and I just dedicated my entire life to Jew posting, you know? You describe my second cousin who has anime posters and is a fascist. I think it would be politically expedient for us to understand that attacks, okay, when they go low, we go low. You know how a lot of conservatives' attacks against LGBT people and the left broadly isn't really about their ideology, but rather superficial characteristics associated with their happiness and desirability? Like, oftentimes when they're attacking trans people, gay people, left-leaning people, they'll just go like fat, blue hair, ugly, loser. Like, they won't even really talk about the politics. The general argument that a lot of the left make is that the politics of the left are inherently dysgenic. They're anti-human, and as a product of that, the ideology morphs you into something bad. Well, they're wrong about that, but I'm right when I say that that's the case with fascism, actually. Seriously, raise your hand, hypers, if you know somebody who's probably a fascist and is also socially intolerable. Like, real, you know? I'm hypersing. There's a strong overlap. The myth of like fascists being like Christian Bale, Sigma grindset, super muscular, ultra successful driven people, it's a lie they tell themselves because they don't want their loser, miserable, unfuckable, suicidal converts to realize the fact that they're failed men and they're going down a bad path. It's not good. You know, they don't want people to accept or understand that. So they do everything in their power to lure them with myths and icons of male success, ones they'll never achieve and will always hate themselves for never achieving. But they believe that just around the corner, just over the hill, other people like them, other fascists, other Catholic converts, other whatevers, are succeeding in that fashion. They'll believe or adopt anything in order to assuage their guilt about being a failed man. That's why you notice that the group of fascists who think that you should fuck a lot of women and the group of fascists who think you shouldn't fuck at all don't actually fight with each other that much. You'd think that would be a huge ideological issue. You'd think that would be like a gigantic problem that they would banter over. But in reality, they're the same position. Not women. And all the women are the same thing to them because they both represent being a man who has control over his sexuality. If you're not having sex at all, and it's by choice, that's because you're a Giga Chad Volcel who has ascended beyond the wiles of women. And if you're a man who has sex with every woman, that's because, well, you're a successful sexually virile male in, you know, the exact opposite fashion. But in either case, you're a Giga Chad, and that's the same thing to them. And they won't argue with each other because on some level, both groups wish they were the other. Guys who fuck a lot of women feel at times in their lowest moments that they are being controlled by women and that their life is nothing more than a string of petty sexual conquests for which they feel very little pleasure, and they will idealize the Volcel trad life. And on the other hand, the guys who are living that Volcel trad life will, on the other hand, you know, idealize being able to finally cut loose and express their sexual dominance over all these women. They're the same thing to them, which is why they don't fight, which is why you see contradictory positions on sexual conquest from these fascists nonstop, you know? But they're both coping, aren't they? Like, really hard, you know? It's all cope. The Volcels aren't refusing to have sex with women because they're exercising supreme control over their willpower. It's because they're either unfuckable or too awkward or scared of women to approach them. And the guys who are fucking around with all these women are not expressing control over women. They are, in fact, in many cases, paying prostitutes or going after, like, drug addicts or people who they know will be easy to sleep with purely because they're concerned with the number count. They're completely controlled by women. Both groups are controlled entirely by women, and they know it, and they're resentful towards it, and this is why misogyny is the root of fascism. Beyond anything else, beyond Jews or race or nationality, blood and soil, ethnicity, it always comes back to sexual frustration. That's the origin point of all of it. Every other politic, every other belief system, prejudice is built on that, which is why every effort to win over young conservatives has been about controlling women. Andrew Tate, sure, fine. Why does Nick Fuentes get so much attention when he makes comments about his being a Volcel or an incel or women or not fucking women or how he's a pedophile who wants a 16-year-old wife or whatever? Why does it always come back to sexuality, about the relationship between men and women every time? Why is the incel movement so popular and growing younger and younger in its average age? Why was there an active conservative movement to appeal to young conservatives and just young lonely people through the incel movement? Why? It's always about sexuality. And I think things are getting worse for them because while the ramp up in loneliness among young men is a real problem, and I do think that the social anomie and alienation of men is a serious issue that I talk about constantly, and by the way, I take very seriously. I take more seriously than like anyone on the left. Let's be clear here, okay? Like more than anyone. But I'm talking about a specific subset of young far-right people whose alienation and loneliness are a product of that ideology, which poisons them and makes them inhuman. And I think it's going to be harder and harder to be that. You know? We're past the era of the alt-right being evocative and subversive. It's not 2016 anymore. People know the game. Even young people know the game. There are people right now in the audience, right now, who attend high school, who know the game, and who know people who know the game, and are aware of the fact that the alt-right is just a Nazi movement. You know, they're not astounded by or impressed by the deviants in a way that people might have been 6, 7 years ago. The things that they have to say to win attention have changed. The accolades they get for bravely defying the establishment, the lust for populism above everything else, it's changed. It's all changed. It's not the same. And I don't think this is going to be a problem. I just don't. I know this comes across a bit rambly, but I'm really trying to get at something here. The tone has shifted, you know? Fascism and the alt-right are no longer abstract ideological concepts that occasionally get labeled to people. Now we know what a fascist looks like, don't we? They're losers. Most of them are failed men. They're weaklings. They have skinny wrists. They're dysgenic. They feel bad about themselves and their bodies. They're insecure. We now know about fascism not just through the image of a Nazi goose-stepping or through the Wikipedia article definition. We know it through the young men we see in the streets, or that cousin that we know who seems to be not doing so well, or that online friend we made who slipped into the alt-right and has been, like, suicide posting every single week for years now. We know what fascism looks like because it's been introduced and broadly disseminated in this country, and we know for an absolute fact that beyond the miserable ideology that it proposes, the horrible things it wants us to do, it also makes you a loser. It makes you unfuckable. And the more that association exists between far-right politics and unfuckability, the more difficult it will be to socially tolerate fascism, the more difficult it will be as a young fascist, especially a young fascist man, to find social success and accolades. Most people, as principled as we pretend to be, most people are very susceptible to the input and judgment of their peers. Everyone, including me, even people like me. And I get in a lot of fights with my peers, folks. Everyone. We're social creatures. We respond this way in predictable and repeatable ways. And I think the clock is ticking for this young upswing in fascist self-expression. I don't think it can survive. I don't think a movement based on unfuckability can survive. And then hopefully when they get over themselves and drop that shit and maybe learn to not be a demon, they can, you know, be socially acclimated in ways that make them happy. Because I want them to be happy as long as they're not a fascist. If they're a fascist, I want them to be miserable. And frankly, I want them to be powerless in whatever manner possible. Go take a long walk off a short bridge. Go run into the ocean. Go live on a tiny island somewhere outside of my range of view. But if right before doing that you change your mind about being a fascist, then fuck it. Welcome. We back. We're so back. I'm so consistent on this, okay? That's it. Your life isn't over forever just because you had bad ideas for a while, and a period of unfuckability is frankly a ritual for young men. Just hopefully not a fascist one. We're so back, folks. How many people in my community right now are in some way or another a former fascist? Or at least you had a time period during which you were far more amenable to these ideas than you are currently, certainly. I'm not asking you to shake your head if the answer is no. I'm asking you to nod if the answer is yes. For which there are a decent number of people. And I get a lot of emails. I get a lot of messages from people saying, oh, you saved me from the alt-right, da-di-da. And I think that's lovely, you know? To be clear, fascism is an anti-human ideology. As long as you're an agent of fascism, an operator, a person who promotes it, you're an enemy of humanity, and I really don't think that's an exaggeration. But you can change. That's always possible. There are lots of people here who have. How do you explain fascist conservative women? There are very few active ideologically fascist women. There are many women who will vote for fascism because they're conservatives, and conservatives have been groomed into voting for fascism. But I'm talking about ideological fascists, people who believe in the tenets of fascism and promote them. And of them, I would bet you to every 50 men, there is one woman. I mean, it's always been like that. Fascist movements, because they're rooted in sexual insecurity, are almost always initially propagated by brown shirts, crowds of young men who feel discontented, alienated, isolated, and sexually anxious, going around beating up minorities because they think those minorities are in some way responsible for the fact that they haven't gotten laid. It was the case with the brown shirts. It's been the case in basically every country that's had a meaningful fascist movement. But yes, if it's a woman, then, you know, obviously everything I've said here applies as well. I still think they will, Jassy. I just don't know. how big of an issue it'll be. This is a weird question, but do you think incels are right about some people being genetically unfuckable? Some people are just very, very, very unattractive or have like severe mental illness that makes them socially incompetent in ways that will definitely work against them. And to that extent, like, yeah, there are some people for whom they're probably never going to have the sexual experiences they want. But this represents an incredibly small portion of the population, you know? This is why, like, an incel will get you to agree with the abstract ideological or, like, the hypothetical. Like, yeah, well, what about a person who's got burn scars all over their body and this, that, they're like, well, could they get laid, like, without having a prostitute? Could they have... It's like, well, no, they would probably have a lot of trouble. But then you go and you see that they've posted a selfie of their face and they look like a perfectly average guy. And you realize their unfuckability isn't their appearance. It's their lack of self-esteem. It's their lack of self-esteem and their misogyny for the most part. If they were confident and not weird about women, they would be fine, you know? But because they believe in this abstract, hypothetical, specific person who can't get laid, they believe, oh, well, I'm a part of that group. When in reality, of course, they're absolutely not.